Hello, everybody. So we are at the end of the semester, last class, and to conclude this course, I have selected two short texts, whether in French and Spanish. And today I will start with Almudena Grandes, the short story that I've selected called Demostración de la existencia de Dios belongs to a series titled Estaciones de Paso. Almudena Grandes was born in Madrid in 1960. She is famous for her 1989 novel Las Edades de Lulu. It was published by La Sonrisa Vertical. That is a pretty, back in the 80s, it's a pretty provocative new editor from the Tusquets family, of which Dr. Gamboa is related. Because her second last name is Gamboa Tusquets, so she's related to Esther Tusquet, the editor of Almudena Grandes' first novel that won the 11th prize for erotic novel. In this short story, however, we don't have any sort of eroticism, rather the story of Rafa in first-person narrator format, where we have, of course, a young man, a teenager. We don't have any indication of his age, but we can guess it's somewhere around 17, 18, because he's still in high school and he's going through a lot. And the short story is about, as you've read, if you've read it, those of you in Spanish, the death of his older brother, Ramon. And Ramon dies of leukemia. And so this short story is a monologue. It's in the format of a monologue, almost a stream of consciousness, where Rafa talks to God, right? Talks to God and is very upset at God, right? So we have here a sample of what it is for the younger generation in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, because this is from early 2000. The relationship that they have with religion, right? And the lack of philosophy at some point in their education. At some point, Rafa mentions the fact that he was withdrawn from the class of ética, right, ethics, in order to be placed in the one of religion. So in Spain, a lot of institutions, in a lot of high schools, or even before high school, you have the choice to choose between philosophy or religion. You can't do both, whether you need to go one route or the other. And usually it's a decision that the parents will make for their children, right? Their teenage children. And so in the case of Rafa, the parents decide, given the circumstances, that he needs emotional support, to withdraw him from the class of philosophy to put him in the class of religion. Of course, other mentions are made of the grandmother, right, which is behind it. So very typical of Spanish matriarchal system, where mothers and grandmothers are more religious than their husbands or their sons, right? There's this kind of division where you see in Spanish culture, where religion is much more feminine, right? It's something that women do, an older woman, usually associated with older women, the practice of Catholicism and rituals, right? Because they've still lived through the dictatorship of Franco, and even though Spain has transitioned into democracy, their reflexes are still very much conditioned by Catholicism, right? But we see that it's coming to an end with the younger generation, the sometimes called the Generación X, right? Sometimes called millennial. Somewhere in between, you will find Rafa, right? Not really belonging to the Generación X from the 1980s, which is this younger generation born after the dictatorship that will engage in a lot of excess, a lot of drug consumption, a lot of sex. So the generation after that would be the generation to which Rafa belongs, right? So as as you've read, the vocabulary is very natural. Sentences are sometimes not even broken in two, right? As I was mentioning earlier on, not only stream of consciousness, but a lot of colloquial language, right? Which is a story that is always very pleasant to read with undergraduate because they get to learn a lot of expression, a lot of very contemporary expression. You know, like vaya mierda de equipo, or you know, you got a lot. You got a lot. Like every paragraph is full of this colloquial language, typical of Madrid, not even of Spain in general, right? We have here a very madrileño character that is talking, going back and forth between his experience of losing his brother and his connection with other people, family members, and religion, philosophy being somewhere an overarching concept or conflict rather that conditions his daily life, right? So we have here quite a sample of what it is to be a proletarian teenager in the outskirts of Madrid, and facing all this difficulty, right? There's also a lot of mention about terrorism, right? Because at that point, ETA, the Basque terrorist organization, is still putting random bombs all over Spain to fight against the state and to claim the independence of the Basque country. So obviously those terrorist attacks would almost always, very often target the Spanish capital, Madrid, right? And an interesting conclusion also to the short story is the obsession with football, which is obviously very typical of Madrid, right? This division between the Real Madrid and the Atletico, kind of, you know, it stays in the background, but is another conflict that echoes the conflicts between religion and philosophy.